The private dining suite on the 41st floor looked more like a ceremonial vault than a room. Velvet drapes muffled every sound, chandeliers burned low with amber restraint, and on the marble table lay a single document wrapped in a leather folio worth more than most cars. A $420 million acquisition, art, land rights, and a centuries-old manuscript. A signature away, the sheikh, tall and severe, held an obsidian fountain pen between his fingers. His advisors formed a hushed wall around him. The sellers, two polished men in tailored Italian suits, watched with the calm of predators already tasting victory. And then there was her, the waitress, the girl no one had bothered to greet. She moved quietly between tables, refilling cups, resetting cutlery, invisible as a shadow. Her name was Mira, but no one here knew it. To them, she was only the girl who carried the silver tray without shaking. Yet she heard everything. She heard the clipped Gulf dialect as the sheikh complained that the coffee was too cold. She heard the experts boasting that the manuscript's vellum passed every known test. She heard the sellers mention, accidentally, a date that should not have been possible. And she saw something no one else saw. Not in the contract, not in the manuscript, in the seal. Her stomach tightened. A quiet panic pressed behind her ribs. She stepped closer, pretending to collect a plate, just as the sheikh lowered the pen toward the signature line. She whispered, not daring to breathe, "Don't sign that." He looked up, startled, more offended than alarmed. She held his gaze, calm, certain. And for the first time all night, someone in that room felt truly seen. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. The room froze, but only for a heartbeat. Then everything resumed with a brittle, embarrassed energy, as if the air itself refused to acknowledge that a waitress had dared speak. The sheikh's advisors exchanged glances, sharp and disapproving. One muttered something in a soft Gulf dialect, dismissive, a tone used for servants and children. The sellers smiled with stiff politeness, pretending not to care, pretending her whisper meant nothing. But Mira felt the echo of that moment settle over her like dust. She kept moving, table to table, plate to plate, hiding the tremor in her hands. Silence kept her safe. Tonight she had broken it. The sheikh's eyes followed her for longer than he intended. Annoyance first, confusion second, and then a faint, almost imperceptible, sliver of doubt. He turned back to the contract. A senior advisor leaned in, voice low, reassuring him that staff interruptions were common in Western venues. Another gestured subtly for security to escort her out after the signing. The sellers continued their presentation, unveiling a velvet box containing the manuscript. A folio of pale vellum, edges uneven, the ink brown with age. Reverent voices filled the room. 11th century provenance. Unbroken chain of custody. Scholarly consensus. Indisputable. Mira heard every word while polishing a glass that did not need polishing. Her pulse drummed behind her ears. She knew what she had seen on the seal. The faintest compression line, almost invisible, something that should not exist on vellum of that claimed age. But she also knew her place. Invisible people do not speak twice. She inhaled slowly, gathering herself, trying to shrink back into the safe invisibility she had rehearsed for years. The invisibility that paid debts, kept immigration questions away, and allowed her to remain unnoticed in rooms she had no right to enter. And yet the sheikh's gaze kept returning to her, not with respect, not yet, but with a question forming at the edges of his certainty. He lifted the pen again. A single truth pulsed inside her. No one notices the person who sees everything. Mira slipped into the narrow service corridor behind the suite, pressing her spine against the cold wall, trying to steady her breath. The clatter of the kitchen felt miles away. Here, the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the refrigeration unit and her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud. She closed her eyes. This was exactly what she couldn't afford. Attention. The wrong glance, the wrong question, the wrong moment of visibility. Her life had been constructed with the precision of someone who feared being seen. A student visa that had quietly expired. A thesis abandoned when her advisor died suddenly, leaving her research without protection. Months of collecting academic rejections like receipts she could no longer throw away. Rent overdue. Dignity depleted. Survival reduced to tips and overtime. And yet, she was still the girl who had spent 10 years studying manuscript history and forensic paleography. She still saw things, even when she desperately wished she didn't. She rubbed her palms together, grounding herself, forcing her breathing into something that resembled control. She knew she should return to the floor. The manager checked the staff rotation obsessively. But her knees trembled at the thought of entering that room again. The sheikh's advisors had the power to end her shift permanently, maybe even report her. The sellers, with their quiet smiles and predatory calm, radiated influence she didn't want to understand. But the seal, that was real. She had noticed it the moment they opened the velvet box. The pressure marks beneath the wax, the faint pattern of a modern platen, the kind used on machines that never existed before the mid-20th century. An 11th century manuscript could not bear that signature. Not in that way. Something was wrong. And $420 million wrong was dangerous. A soft knock rattled the service door. Not aggressive. Measured. Her breath caught. For one terrifying second, she imagined uniformed security waiting to escort her out of the building. But when she opened the door, it wasn't security. It was the sheikh's youngest advisor. The one who had remained silent while the others mocked her. He didn't step inside, only regarded her with a look that was too close to curiosity. "His Excellency wants you back in the room," he said. Her stomach dropped. "Now." She nodded, swallowing the tremor in her throat, and stepped forward with the careful posture of someone preparing for punishment. Sometimes survival begins with stepping back into the room that terrifies you. The door to the private suite closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than a slammed gate. Every head turned, not violently, worse, slowly, with the offended curiosity of people unaccustomed to being interrupted twice in a single evening. Her manager lurked near the corner, face tight, hands clasped behind his back, as if restraining the urge to drag her out. The sellers leaned back in their chairs, smirks sharpening. The sheikh's senior advisor regarded her with the tolerant disdain reserved for a misbehaving child, but the sheikh himself. He watched her differently now, not kindly, not respectfully, but searching. "Come forward," he said. She obeyed, every step measured. Her apron felt too visible, her shoes too loud, her existence too exposed. She kept her eyes lowered, safer that way. "You told me not to sign," the sheikh said, voice cool, the clipped Gulf dialect still wrapped in authority. "Why?" Her throat tightened. This was the moment she wished she could take back. A single whisper had pulled her into a room she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. Now there was no disappearing, no safety. "I apologize, Your Excellency," she said softly. "I shouldn't have spoken. That wasn't my question." A subtle shift passed through the room, the kind that makes walls lean inward and mirrors go silent. The sellers exchanged a controlled glance. The lead one spoke before she could answer. "Your Excellency," she is staff. Perhaps she misheard something. "Our experts." "Let her speak," the sheikh said, cutting him off without raising his voice. The seller's composure cracked, just for an instant. Mira felt their attention burn through her like a laser, but she couldn't back away now. She inhaled, forcing air through lungs that wanted to collapse. "I noticed something," she said, "on the seal of the manuscript." One of the experts snorted. Another advisor scoffed under his breath in a rough dialect, calling her presumptuous. Mira felt the humiliation rise like heat under her skin. The sheikh's jaw tightened. He gestured to the manuscript box. "Show me." Her hands shook when she lifted the velvet lid, revealing the pale vellum sitting beneath protective glass. The seal gleamed faintly, old wax catching the yellow chandelier light. She didn't touch it. She would never dare. But she leaned closer. "There's a compression pattern beneath the wax," she said carefully. "Barely visible, but it's too regular. Too uniform. It looks like pressure from a platen. The kind used in mechanical presses." The room exhaled in collective skepticism. The senior advisor folded his arms. "This is absurd. She carries plates, not degrees." Mira lowered her eyes. His words hit the softest part of her, the part that remembered her abandoned thesis, her unpaid university ID card, the library she could no longer enter. The sheikh studied her with unsettling stillness. Her voice almost broke, but she held it steady. "I'm not asking you to believe me, sir," she whispered, "only to look twice. The oldest truth is this: courage is often just fear that moved an inch forward." A fresh wave of restrained irritation swept through the room. The sellers exchanged a look, polished, confident, the practiced assurance of men who had already counted the money. The experts shifted their posture, indignant that a waitress dared cast a shadow across their certainty. But the sheikh did not move. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, gaze pinned on her with the precise stillness of someone recalculating every assumption he'd walked in with. "Explain what you mean," he said. Her pulse kicked hard. She felt the weight of every stare. The kind that judged, dismissed, measured the cost of silencing her. Her apron strings suddenly felt too tight around her waist. "I only saw it when the light hit the wax from the side," she said quietly. "A compression grid. Very fine, almost invisible. Handmade 11th century seals don't have that. They're imperfect, slightly irregular. This one isn't." An expert leaned forward, voice dripping condescension. "Mechanical impressions can occur when a seal is transported, pressed against another object under pressure." She is misinformed. But Mira shook her head, gently, carefully, as though disagreeing too openly might break the fragile permission she'd been given to speak. "No, transport pressure is uneven. This one is uniform. That only happens when pressure comes from a machine, not from time." The seller's smiles faltered. The sheikh noticed. He rose, walked to the table, and lowered himself to examine the seal up close. The room held its breath. His advisors hovered, offering explanations before he even asked for them. Dust artifacts, preservation effects, light distortion. He ignored them all. "What else did you see?" he asked her without looking up. Her heart thudded hard enough to hurt. This was dangerous territory. Every instinct urged her to retreat into silence, to protect what little stability she had left. But she had already stepped too far. "The ink density," she said. "The transitions. They're too clean. No feathering. No oxidation halo. It looks consistent. Too consistent." One of the experts slammed a hand on the table. "This is unacceptable. She is undermining a multi-institutional verification effort. With respect, Your Excellency, she is not qualified." A flicker of something, irritation, suspicion, curiosity, passed across the sheikh's face. "Perhaps not," he said. "But she is observant." Mira lowered her eyes again, struggling to contain the tremor in her hands. She had not meant to interfere. She had not meant to be noticed. She had learned painfully that invisibility was safer than brilliance. But brilliance had slipped out anyway. The sellers straightened, masks cracking at the edges. Their attorney whispered urgently in their ear. A subtle urgency began to pulse beneath the table. The kind that appears only when the truth is dangerously close. Mira stepped back, but not quickly enough. She felt every gaze sharpen on her, as if her presence alone threatened their entire construction. Sometimes the smallest voice becomes the fault line beneath a fortune. The tension inside the suite thickened, tightening like a rope pulled slowly from both ends. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim, as if the room itself recognized the shift. This was no longer a ceremonial signing. This was a fracture. The sheikh remained standing, studying the manuscript with unsettling care. The sellers whispered fiercely to each other in clipped English, their earlier composure dissolving around the edges. The experts hovered defensively, as if shielding their reputations with their bodies. Mira stayed near the back of the room, spine straight, eyes down. She wanted nothing more than to fade again into the safety of quiet service work, but she could feel the gravity of what she had done. She had introduced doubt into a space designed to eliminate it. Her manager approached her, jaw clenched. "What were you thinking?" he hissed under his breath. "You're done after tonight. Do you understand?" She nodded without looking up. Of course she understood. Survival had always been transactional, but then the sheikh turned. "Bring her closer." The manager froze. Mira did too. He gestured her to the table, and she approached with the slow, careful movements of someone walking across thin ice. The sheikh held the manuscript box open. "You said the ink density is inconsistent with age." His voice was calm, but something electric flickered beneath it. "How would you know?" She swallowed, the truth pressing at her throat. Revealing her background was dangerous. It invited questions, scrutiny, the kind of attention that could unravel her entire life. But lying would be worse. "I studied manuscript analysis for my master's," she said quietly. "Before my program ended." It wasn't the full story, but it was enough. The expert stiffened. The seller's attorney cursed under his breath. The sheikh raised one eyebrow, the first sign of genuine interest. "Then look again," he said, "not as staff, as someone who knows what she sees." Her breath trembled. She stepped forward. The manuscript lay under warm light, the ink strokes soft and brown. She leaned closer, careful not to touch, watching how the vellum shifted under illumination. And then she saw it again, the thing that had bothered her from the first second but had been too subtle to name. "The ink isn't oxidizing properly," she said. "It should have a halo, a faint darkening around older strokes where the iron gall interacted with air. But here, the transitions are flat, uniform. That only happens when ink is artificially aged." A cold stillness sliced through the room. One seller immediately snapped, "That is not true! Our verification team—" But Mira cut him off, not with volume, but with certainty. "Also," she continued, voice steadying with each word, "the vellum edges are too clean. They're irregular, yes, but not in the way that centuries of humidity and shrinkage would produce. They look manufactured." The sheikh's gaze burned into the manuscript. A shadow crossed his expression. Not fear, but recognition. The senior advisor stepped in, desperate to regain control. "Your Excellency, with respect, this is speculative. We should proceed. The contract is sound." But the sheikh didn't answer him. The seller's attorney slid the contract closer again, almost casually, as though momentum alone could erase suspicion. Mira felt her chest tighten. They were pushing him toward the signature line again. She had seconds before the room snapped back into certainty, before 420 million vanished into a beautifully constructed lie. She exhaled, barely a whisper. Sometimes the truth waits for the one person who cannot afford to speak it. The sheikh stood motionless, the pen resting between his fingers like a live wire. The seller's attorney angled the contract toward him with calculated nonchalance, a gesture so smooth it bordered on hypnotic. A nod here, a reassuring smile there. The choreography of high-stakes deception was almost elegant, but Mira felt the shift beneath it. Something in the room had begun to vibrate in the space between certainty and fear. Her pulse climbed again. She sensed the danger rising not from the manuscript anymore, but from the sudden suffocating pressure to complete the deal before doubt spread too far. Deals like this had momentum. Slow at first, then unstoppable. She could feel that momentum pulling the sheikh back toward the signature line. The senior advisor stepped beside him, lowering his voice into a polished Gulf dialect that was soft but commanding. "Your Excellency, let us end this. The interruptions are beneath you." Mira felt the sting of that line deep in her chest. Interruptions. Beneath. As if truth had a hierarchy. The sellers leaned forward, confident again. One of them chuckled lightly, as if annoyed by a stubborn piece of dust on a perfect suit. "She may have an academic background, but our verification involved 3 institutions," he said. "Her observations are interesting, but irrelevant. She cannot challenge established consensus." Mira lowered her eyes. Consensus. That word had buried her entire academic life. The rejection letters, the closed doors, the professors who said she was brilliant but out of alignment with departmental priorities. But she had never chased consensus. She chased anomalies. The sheikh reached for the pen again. Her breath caught. He hesitated for only one moment, a flicker barely visible, before lifting the pen firmly. The investors watching from the side straightened. The senior advisor relaxed. The sellers exhaled, smiles returning in slow, triumphant arcs. They believed the moment had passed. They believed she had spent her usefulness. Her manager shot her a warning look. "Stay back. Stay quiet. Don't make this worse." She took a step back, then another. She felt the walls closing in. Not from the room, but from her own history. Invisibility had saved her, protected her, kept the system from noticing her vulnerabilities. But invisibility also meant silence. Silence meant letting him walk into a trap crafted with surgical precision. She lifted her head. The sheikh lowered the pen toward the signature line. A tremor ran through her. Half fear, half clarity. She could feel it now, the weight of a scheme that had taken years to construct. A forged manuscript. A manufactured provenance, and worst of all, a contract designed to lock the sheikh into irreversible liability. If she stayed silent, she would watch catastrophe unfold from 2 steps away. Her voice cracked through the air before she could stop it. "Your Excellency, there's something else." The pen froze. Every gaze in the room snapped toward her. Her chest ached with the force of her own courage. Sometimes the moment you fear most becomes the doorway you cannot avoid. Silence hit the room like a dropped stone. The sheikh did not turn immediately. He kept his head lowered, the pen hovering a breath above the signature line. His advisors stiffened. The seller's expressions curdled into open irritation. Her manager closed his eyes, already preparing the termination speech. Mira felt every thread of safety in her life snap at once, but she stepped forward anyway. "There's an anomaly in the contract," she said quietly. That word, anomaly, pulled the sheikh's attention like a magnet. He lifted his gaze slowly, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in focus. "What anomaly?" he asked. The sellers jumped in, before she could answer. "She's overstepping. Security should remove her. This is harassment." But the sheikh raised one hand and the room fell obediently silent. Mira approached the table again, palms damp, breath unsteady. She pointed, not touching, to the contract's lower margin. "There," she said, "the liability clause." The senior advisor rolled his eyes. "That clause is standard." "It isn't," Mira said softly. The sheikh leaned closer. Mira inhaled slowly, gathering the thread of her reasoning. "The phrasing is too clean," she said. "Too modern. The cadence is corporate, not legal. And the placement, it's buried under a restoration funding note, positioned as if it's part of the preservation agreement." The sellers exchanged a panicked micro-glance, tiny but visible. She continued, "This clause doesn't just finalize the purchase. It transfers responsibility for any provenance disputes to the buyer. Meaning," she swallowed, "meaning if the manuscript is ever proven inauthentic, you would still owe the full payment, with penalties, even if you sued and won." A ripple of shock tore across the room. The sheikh's hand tightened around the pen. The senior advisor's face went pale, a rare, unguarded reaction. "That can't be right," he murmured, flipping pages with trembling fingers. But the seller's attorney stepped forward sharply. "This is absurd. She has no legal training." "I can read," Mira said, voice steadying. "And the clause is written to be invisible until it's too late." The sheikh turned to the attorney. "Explain the clause." The attorney hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But hesitation, in a room like this, is confession. "It's a protective measure," he said carefully, "standard in high-value transactions." "It reverses the burden of proof," Mira said quietly. Gasps flickered around the room. Reversing the burden of proof was not standard, it was predatory. The sheikh stared at the attorney with a calm so cold it tightened the air. "This was never disclosed." "It didn't need to be." "It did," the sheikh said sharply. The sellers tried to recover, voices rising, insisting that it was all legal, that the clause was misunderstood, that she was manipulating language she didn't fully grasp. But Mira wasn't finished. "There's something even more serious," she said. Every heartbeat in the room paused. She pointed at the bottom of the page again. "The clause is written in a formatting style used by one specific software, a drafting tool from a provenance lab in Geneva." The sellers went still. "And that lab," she continued, "is the same one that authenticated your manuscript." The entire room inhaled, a lab verifying its own forgery. A contract shielding the forgers from exposure. A $420 million scheme disguised as scholarship. The sheikh lowered the pen, slowly, deliberately. Sometimes collapse begins with one person daring to name the thing everyone else was paid not to see. The sheikh's pen clicked softly against the table as he set it down. A small, precise sound that felt more final than any signature. The sellers stiffened. The experts froze mid-breath. The senior advisor stepped forward, voice tight, almost pleading. "Your Excellency, let me—" But the sheikh lifted a hand, silencing him. Mira stood a short distance away, not trusting her legs to hold her. She had gone too far. She knew that. Whatever happened now, she had crossed a line. Invisible people were never meant to approach. The seller's attorney leaned toward the sheikh with a strained smile. "We appear to be discussing hypotheticals. Why don't we return to the actual terms of—" Mira stepped forward again. Her manager whispered her name, a warning wrapped in fear, but she kept going. "Your Excellency," she said softly. "The contract is structured to hide the trap. But the manuscript hides something else." The room sharpened around her, every gaze pulling tight. The sheikh studied her with a new expression, not irritation, not curiosity. Something closer to calculation, as though he was now assessing her the way he would evaluate any high-value asset. "What else did you notice?" he asked. Mira's pulse hammered in her throat. She reached for words she had been afraid to say since the moment she'd glimpsed the vellum under the chandelier light. "The page margins," she said quietly. "They're wrong." One of the experts scoffed loudly. "Margins vary on medieval manuscripts. That proves nothing." "Yes," she said. "Margins vary, but not like this." She moved closer to the table, leaning just far enough to see the sheet beneath the protective glass. "In medieval vellum preparation," she said carefully, "the drying frame leaves microstriations, irregular, almost rhythmic, caused by hand tension. These pages show a uniform pull, a mechanical pull. It's not possible for something from the 11th century." The seller's face is drained of color. The sheikh's advisor grabbed the manuscript box, squinting at the edges under the light. His breath caught ever so slightly. A tell. A tiny, involuntary confirmation. "This is absurd," one seller snapped, voice cracking around the edges. "She is fabricating terminology." But the sheikh cut him off. "Why would she?" he asked quietly. No one answered. Mira drew a shaky breath. She could feel the room tightening, spiraling, folding inward. Everything in her wanted to stop, to retreat, to apologize. But she had already jumped. Now the only direction left was forward. "There's more," she whispered, and then she said it. The part she had been trying not to believe since she first saw the manuscript. The ink pattern shows a second hand, a modern one. Someone added strokes to mimic deterioration. But the additions don't match the original script. They tried to age it artificially, but the pen pressure reveals hesitation marks. Dead silence. It was as if the room had turned to glass. The sheikh exhaled slowly, the sound controlled, dangerous. "You are telling me this manuscript is a forgery?" She shook her head gently. "No, Your Excellency. I'm telling you it's two things at once. An old document and a modern reconstruction. Someone grafted authenticity onto deception. A hybrid designed to pass initial tests, but not scrutiny." The sellers erupted. Accusations, outrage, threats of defamation. The experts insisted she misinterpreted the evidence. The attorney demanded she leave the room immediately. But none of them mattered, because the sheikh was no longer looking at them. He was looking only at Mira, a long, steady, penetrating look. The look of someone reconsidering the entire architecture of trust, value, and risk. She felt her knees weaken. She had done it. She had interrupted the signing. She had crossed the point of no return. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It breaks the door because waiting would cost too much. The room seemed to shrink around the table, every surface absorbing sound as if preparing for a confession. The sellers' voices ricocheted in fragments, legal threats, accusations of sabotage, demands that the sheikh control his staff. But the sheikh didn't look at them, not once. He gestured toward the manuscript with a slow, deliberate sweep of his hand. "Continue." A command, not to his advisors, to her. Mira stepped forward again, heart hammering. She could feel every consequence waiting on the other side of this moment. Termination, retaliation, deportation. She had no shield except the truth. And even that was fragile. She pointed to the lower right corner of the vellum, the place where only someone who had studied the craft would know to look. "The stitching holes," she said. "Look closely." An expert scoffed. "Binding holes are irrelevant." "They aren't," she said, her voice steady now, sharpened by clarity. 11th century choirs used a specific spacing. 5 holes. Slightly uneven because the awl was hand-driven, but this page has 6, and perfectly spaced. She glanced at the sheikh. That spacing comes from a modern stitching frame. The expert's jaw clenched. Mira continued, voice gaining quiet momentum. And the fiber direction is wrong. This vellum was stretched in a way that leaves perpendicular strain lines, a method adopted only in the late 19th century. Before that, the tension patterns were diagonal. She leaned slightly, letting the light reveal microscopic scratches. And here, the surface has been gently abraded. Someone tried to mimic age wear, but the abrasion is uniform, not organic. Natural wear is chaotic. The sheikh said nothing, but his lips pressed into a thin, dangerous line. The seller's attorney stepped forward. Enough. She is not certified. This is defamation, and you are allowing... The sheikh's voice cut through him like a blade. Silence. The attorney stepped back. Mira exhaled shakily, then pointed to the contract beside the manuscript. Now look at section 12.4. The senior advisor flipped to it with trembling fingers. This clause, Mira said, is written to neutralize any challenge to the manuscript's authenticity. It phrases disputes as restoration disagreements, meaning even if the manuscript is proven partially modern, it will be classified as a restoration issue, not a forgery. The sheikh's brows lifted in a slow, lethal arc. She continued. That allows the sellers to keep the full payment, because they'll claim the restoration was disclosed. It wasn't, the sheikh said coldly. No, Mira replied. But the clause lets them argue that you misunderstood. She let that sink in. This isn't just a forged manuscript. It's a forged manuscript paired with a contract engineered to make disputing it impossible. The sellers erupted again, shouting, gesturing, swearing that she misunderstood every detail. But Mira wasn't looking at them. She was watching the sheikh. He stared at the manuscript as if seeing it for the very first time. A long, heavy silence fell. Then the sheikh lifted the contract slowly, like lifting a dead weight. Tell me, he said to Mira, exactly what you think this is. Her voice was barely a whisper. A $420 million trap, Your Excellency. The room stopped breathing. In the soft glow of the chandeliers, she realized something unmistakable. He believed her. Sometimes clarity arrives all at once, not as light, but as the moment a lie can no longer bear its own weight. The sheikh rested his palms on the table, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the contract as if it were a living creature that had just revealed its teeth. The sellers exchanged a rapid series of glances, small, frantic, coded, the choreography of men watching control slip from their hands. Walk me through it, the sheikh said, quietly. Not to his advisors. To Mira. Her pulse stumbled. She stepped closer, each movement careful, respectful, but no longer apologetic. Something had shifted, subtly but undeniably, in the way he regarded her. Not as an interruption, not as a mistake, as an analyst. She pointed to the contract again, tracing the margin without touching it. The trap begins with the restoration clause, she said. It blends 3 concepts into one paragraph: preservation funding, custodial conditions, and continuity of liability. In English? The senior advisor muttered bitterly. In English, Mira said, it means the buyer pays for everything, even if the object turns out to be fake. The sheikh's jaw tightened. She continued. When paired with section 12.4, it does something worse. It shifts responsibilities to you retroactively. The seller's attorney stepped in, sweating now. That's not accurate. It is, Mira said calmly. The clause states that all prior treatments, restorations, or enhancements, disclosed or undisclosed, are acknowledged by the buyer as integral to the object's condition. She let the words drift into the room like slow poison. The sheikh looked up sharply. Undisclosed? Yes, Mira whispered. They inserted that word to protect themselves. If you ever challenge the manuscript, they'll argue you accepted its altered state knowingly. No? The attorney's voice cracked. This is standard language. It's a trap, Mira said, because the clause doesn't specify what was restored. It doesn't require them to list modifications. It doesn't even define authenticity. It only defines ownership. The sheikh's eyes darkened. Meaning? Meaning you wouldn't be purchasing a manuscript, she said softly. You would be purchasing responsibility for it. The room went deadly still. She moved to the next page. And here, section 15, 2. They included a confidentiality provision that forbids any third-party testing without their permission. The sheikh exhaled sharply. They wanted to control the evidence. Yes, she said. If you discovered the forgery, you wouldn't legally be allowed to prove it. The seller's composure shattered. One lunged forward. This is an outrageous misreading. But Mira didn't flinch. She pointed to the final line. And this is the real blade. The sheikh leaned in. It states that any dispute about authenticity will be resolved through a private arbitration panel. One pre-selected by the sellers. 3 arbitrators, all from the same institution. The same one, she said, voice steady as steel. That certified your manuscript. The sheikh's breath left him in a slow, devastating realization. The same lab, he said. The same lab, she confirmed. In Geneva. Yes. And they would judge the case. They would judge themselves, Mira said. And you would lose, no matter what. The sheikh straightened. His advisors looked ill. The sellers' faces were drained of color. In that charged, fragile silence, Mira felt the truth settle over the room with full clarity. He had been minutes, seconds, from signing away his fortune. The sheikh looked at her, eyes sharp with a cold, dawning respect. Sometimes the most dangerous traps aren't hidden in ink. They're hidden in the confidence that no one will read closely enough to see them. For a long moment, no one moved. The contract lay open on the table like a dissected creature, its mechanisms exposed, its deceptions illuminated under the steady glow of the chandeliers. The sellers, trapped between fury and fear, hovered near the edges of the room, as if distance might dissolve evidence. The sheikh remained perfectly still, eyes narrowed, fingertips pressed lightly against the table. A man accustomed to danger, yes, but not deception carried out in a language he trusted. He inhaled once, deeply, a controlled breath that sounded like the quiet before a storm. Mira, he said, addressing her by name for the first time. Tell me what you think happened here. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of being asked. She stepped forward, posture straightening despite herself. I think, she said carefully, the manuscript is real, but incomplete. The sellers stirred, ready to interrupt, but the sheikh silenced them with a glance sharp enough to cut. Mira continued. I think they found fragments, authentic ones, damaged, uneven, maybe even unreadable. But instead of preserving them, they reconstructed the manuscript to complete it. They added text. They shaved the vellum. They resurfaced pages to match tones. Then they inserted those alterations into an older binding. The sheikh studied her. Why? Because fragments aren't worth 420 million, she said softly. But a complete 11th century work with a unique seal, that would be priceless. The senior advisor ran a trembling hand across his forehead. A hybrid object, he whispered. Half ancient, half fabricated. Mira nodded. And that's why the contract is so aggressive. A genuine manuscript doesn't need legal armor, but a reconstructed one does. One seller snapped, desperate now. This is conspiracy. She's inventing stories. But Mira lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with a calm that sliced through the room. You overcorrected, she said. Whoever forged this was skilled, but not a paleographer. The expert nearest her bristled. Explain. She gestured subtly toward the ink strokes. These lines, she said, are perfect. Too perfect. Medieval scribes were consistent, but they weren't machines. There should be slips, imperfections, micro-variations that betray human fatigue. But here, every stroke looks rehearsed, as if traced. A cold tremor passed through the room, and the linguistic inconsistencies, she added, are worse. The sheikh straightened. What inconsistencies? Mira paused, choosing her words with surgical care. The text imitates classical Arabic, but occasionally slips into the rhythm of modern phrasing. The syntax tightens in places no 11th century scribe would tighten. Some constructions mimic contemporary academic translations. She looked directly at the sheikh. It reads like someone trying to write in a language they don't fully inhabit. The sellers froze, their silence suddenly louder than any protest. Mira let the conclusion settle between them. It's not just a forgery, she said. It's a forgery written by someone who relied on modern patterns to imitate ancient ones. The sheikh's expression hardened with a realization that looked almost painful. They thought no one would read it closely enough, he murmured. Mira lowered her eyes, voice barely audible. They counted on your trust. The air tightened around them, the weight of near disaster finally visible in the faces of every advisor, every investor, every expert who had been seconds away from certifying catastrophe with a flourish of ink. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come wrapped in reverence, because reverence blinds faster than greed. The chandeliers flickered as if reacting to the tension. Warm light trembling across polished silver and untouched plates. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The manuscript lay in the center like evidence at a murder trial, and the sellers now looked less like businessmen and more like defendants waiting for a verdict they already feared. The sheikh slowly lowered himself into his chair, fingertips pressed together. The posture of a man assembling the final pieces of a puzzle he wished he had never touched. Mira, he said, show me the linguistic slips. Her pulse jumped. This was the part she always feared revealing. The depth of what she knew. The thing that had ruined her academic path more than once. Her ability to hear language the way other people hear notes going off-key. She stepped forward. The third folio, she said. Line 14. The senior advisor turned the page under the protective glass, careful and tense. There, she pointed. The sheikh leaned in. What am I looking at? A sentence that appears classical, she said, but the structure isn't. The phrasing compresses the object and verb in a way that reflects modern translation habits. It's too concise. 11th century scribes favored fluidity, not efficiency. One of the experts sputtered. That is subjective. It's not, she replied, voice calm. It's pattern recognition, and here, she pointed again, the writer uses a construction that mirrors contemporary Gulf formal speech. Not ancient, not classical, modern. A ripple of shock tore through the advisors. One whispered something in a broken dialect, disbelief and fear tangled together. Mira continued, voice steadying with each word. And this passage attempts to mimic archaic vocabulary, but chooses terms that didn't enter use until centuries later. A scribe that old couldn't have written it. The sheikh's jaw tightened. The sellers tried to cut in, insisting that she misunderstood, that linguistic evolution was complex. that variations existed, but their words collapsed under the weight of mounting evidence. Mira inhaled, then revealed the part she had been saving, the detail that had pierced her like lightning the moment she heard the manuscript read aloud during the presentation. "The cadence of the blessing formula," she said. The sheikh looked up sharply. "That," she added quietly, "was the real giveaway." The room leaned in. In the 11th century, that formula was written with breath-length phrasing. Long, poetic. But whoever wrote this version shortened it, tightened it. It's a modern habit, something influenced by contemporary Gulf ceremonial speech. A long, devastating silence fell. "It's the rhythm of someone trying to sound ancient," she said, "but thinking in the patterns of today." The cellar's facade cracked at last. One slammed his palm on the table, but the sheikh didn't even flinch. Instead, he looked directly into Mira's eyes. "And you heard all of this," he said quietly, "while serving coffee." Her heart stuttered. "Yes, Your Excellency." He studied her for a long, piercing moment. Not as a waitress, not as an inconvenience, but as an analyst whose insight had just saved him from ruin. Then he leaned back, exhaling a slow, heavy breath. "The manuscript is a forgery," he said. The cellars erupted. Loud, frantic, desperate. The attorney threatened litigation. The experts demanded independent testing. The room devolved into a chaotic storm of voices. But Mira didn't move. She watched the sheikh watching the chaos, and she saw the exact second he realized something deeper. Someone, somewhere, had thought him gullible. Sometimes the deepest cut is not the deception itself, but discovering how confidently someone expected you not to notice. Chaos thickened around the table, frantic voices, legal threats, reputational panic. But the sheikh didn't rise, didn't shout, didn't even blink. He simply let the storm burn itself out. The cellar's protests grew shrill, then strained, then thin, until their own desperation embarrassed them into silence. Only then did he speak. "Everyone," he said quietly, "sit." The authority in his voice emptied the air. The cellars sat, the experts sat. Even his own advisors, shaken and pale, obeyed without hesitation. Mira remained standing, unsure whether she was included. The sheikh noticed. "You stay where you are," he said. Not unkindly, not softly, just decisively. The attorney cleared his throat, grasping at the last threads of control. "Your Excellency, the accusations made here." The sheikh raised his hand. The attorney fell silent mid-sentence. He lifted the contract, letting the pages fall open, and turned it toward the cellars. "You crafted a document to hide liability," he said. "You engineered a manuscript to mimic authenticity. You selected arbitrators from the same institution that certified the object, and you expected me to overlook all of it." His voice did not rise, but every word struck with surgical precision. The lead seller tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding. The manuscript is authentic." "No," Mira said softly. "Not fully." The sheikh gestured for her to continue. "There's a fragment inside the binding," she explained. "I saw it when they lifted the page earlier. The stitching exposes a torn edge that doesn't match the reconstructed parts." She swallowed. "That fragment is real. The rest was built around it. They used truth to hide a lie." A ripple of stunned realization passed across the room. The sheikh turned back to the cellars, eyes cold. "You thought a single authentic fragment would shield your forgery." The lead seller clenched his jaw. "This is absurd. You cannot rely on the observations of a—" He stopped, because the sheikh's gaze had shifted, slow, dangerous, toward him. "A what?" he asked. The seller swallowed the word. The sheikh leaned back, expression unreadable. "You dismissed her once," he said. "I won't allow you to do it twice." Mira felt her breath catch, not from gratitude, but from the shock of being defended. One of the experts tried again, voice trembling. "Your Excellency, if allowed, we can present a timeline of the manuscript's custody." "No," Mira said softly. "You can present the version of the timeline they gave you." The sheikh's eyebrow lifted. "What do you mean?" Mira stepped closer to the table, pointing at the manuscript's binding. "There are two types of dust trapped inside the spine. One matches the region the sellers claim it came from." She looked at the sellers. "The other does not." The senior advisor leaned forward. "Where is the second one from?" Mira hesitated. Then she said it. "A laboratory environment, very clean. Too clean. There's no soil residue, no pollen traces, no environmental particulates older than a few decades. The manuscript was opened, altered, and resealed in a controlled space." The sellers went rigid. The sheikh stared at the manuscript like it was a corpse, finally confessing its cause of death. "So the provenance," he said, "is fabricated?" "Yes," Mira whispered, "every piece of it." She looked at him, and for the first time since the night began, their eyes met not in fear or duty, but in shared understanding. He had been targeted, she had been ignored, and both of them had seen the trap at the same moment, from different angles of power. The sheikh clasped his hands slowly. "It ends now," he said. The room held its breath. Sometimes truth doesn't win by force. It wins by making the lie too heavy to hold. The sellers looked cornered now, stripped of the smooth confidence they'd worn like armor when the evening began. Their suits still gleamed, their cufflinks still caught the light. But their certainty, that had evaporated. The sheikh didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Explain," he said. The lead seller's throat bobbed. "Your Excellency, we acted on information provided to us." "No," Mira answered before the sheikh could. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air with perfect clarity. "The contract format, the stitching pattern, the dust inside the spine, the modern phrasing. These things don't happen by accident. Someone engineered this." The sellers turned to her with hatred sharpened by fear. Her manager shrank into the corner, terrified of having hired her in the first place. The advisors stared at Mira as if she had stepped out of the manuscript itself. The sheikh leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Tell me exactly what the dust means," he said. Mira steadied her breath. This was the technical part, the part people usually tuned out. But the sheikh, he was listening as though her words were currency. "In authentic manuscripts," she said, "the dust inside the binding tells a story. Environmental particles accumulate over centuries. Tiny bits of air, sand, soil, pollen. If the manuscript has traveled countries, you'd see layered residues. Diversity." She pointed gently at the spine. "But here, the dust is uniform, sterile. It's the kind that forms only in clean, controlled environments, modern labs where the air is filtered." The sheikh's advisor whispered almost to himself. "So it was opened. Recently?" "Yes," Mira said. "Opened. Altered. Rebound." "And the fragment you mentioned?" the sheikh asked. She nodded. "That's the bait. The authentic piece they built the rest around. It creates just enough truth to pass surface-level inspection." The seller's attorney slammed a palm onto the table. "This is slander, baseless, invented. You are allowing a staff member—" The sheikh cut him off with a single sentence. "You will not speak to her again." The attorney froze. Mira took a shaky breath. The room felt different now. Not safer, but more aligned. The sheikh had shifted his weight away from the cellars entirely. "What's the final piece?" he asked her. "There is something you haven't said." She closed her eyes for a moment. This was the part she had tried not to believe, the part that made her voice tremble. "When they turned the manuscript earlier," she said softly, "I noticed a shadow line under the first folio. Very faint, most people wouldn't see it." "What kind of line?" the sheikh asked. "A transfer mark," she whispered. "From a modern printer." The room imploded in silence. The cellars twitched. Involuntary, panicked, guilty. "The printer didn't leave ink," she continued, "but pressure, heat, a slight warping visible only at a specific angle. It's tiny, almost invisible." The sheikh stared at her. "How did you see that?" She looked down, embarrassed. "I've worked with damaged manuscripts before," she said. "Your eyes learn to see what isn't meant to be seen." The lead seller snapped, "This is fiction!" But the sheikh cut him off with a single look, so sharp and controlled it could have stopped a heartbeat. Then he turned back to Mira. "What does the transfer mark mean?" "It means the reconstructed pages," she answered, "were printed before they were inked by hand." The entire room inhaled at once. A hybrid forgery, printed outlines, hand-inked strokes, artificial aging, a contract designed to bury all of it. The sheikh pressed his palm against the table, slow and deliberate, as realization settled into his bones. "You saved my fortune tonight," he said. The sellers erupted, shouting, insisting there was no proof, demanding immediate signing to avoid misunderstandings. But no one listened to them now. Mira stood perfectly still, terrified, exposed, and yet, for the first time in years, certain. Sometimes a single, undeniable detail is enough to unravel everything built on arrogance. The sweet felt colder now, not from temperature but from exposure, the kind of exposure that strips a lie down to its scaffolding. The sheikh rose slowly, placing both hands on the table. The sellers flinched instinctively, as if the shift in his posture alone could summon consequences. His advisors straightened, almost bracing themselves. Mira stayed exactly where she was, though her pulse hammered against her ribs so loudly she wondered if the room could hear it. "Close the manuscript," he said. The senior advisor complied immediately, lowering the velvet lid with a soft final sigh, the sound of a scheme being buried alive. The attorney opened his mouth. The sheikh did not let him speak. "You brought me a forgery," he said, voice low, controlled, and paired it with a contract engineered to make the crime untouchable. The lead seller tried to regain footing. "Your Excellency, we can renegotiate terms." "No." The sheikh's tone didn't rise, but it hit like a blunt force. "You thought my trust was an asset you could spend. You thought expertise could be faked. You thought no one in the room could see you." His gaze flicked, briefly, sharply, toward Mira. "You were wrong." The sellers stiffened. He continued, eyes locked on them like a verdict. "You didn't just forge a manuscript. You forged the assumption that I would not recognize the language you corrupted." Mira's breath caught. He wasn't talking about technical language. He meant Arabic, her linguistic insight, her unnoticed correction earlier in the night, her whisper that first broke the room's rhythm. The sheikh stepped closer to the sellers, a controlled force radiating from every movement. "You underestimated the one person here who wasn't blinded by money." The sellers tensed, but Mira shook her head slightly. "This isn't about me," she whispered. The sheikh turned to her, a faint, razor-thin edge of something like admiration in his expression. "It is," he said. "You saw what none of us did." He faced the sellers again. "You planned to blame the Geneva lab if anything surfaced. You planned arbitration in your favor. You planned a legal maze around the truth. His voice hardened. "But you didn't plan for her." The room went still. And then, finally, the mask cracked. One of the sellers lunged at the manuscript box, as if destroying the evidence might save them. The senior advisor intercepted him halfway, pushing him back with a forceful hand. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Security outside the door stirred. The sheikh lifted one finger. Security entered silently, efficiently, forming a wall between Mira and the sellers. The attorney sputtered. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," the sheikh said. "This is an insult." He turned to Mira, and she felt the weight shift again, from confrontation to assessment. "Tell me," he said, "what would have happened tomorrow if I had signed?" Mira steadied herself. "First," she said, "they would have filed the contract immediately. You would be bound to confidentiality. Then the manuscript would be transferred to a vault. You wouldn't be allowed to test it without their panel's permission." The sheikh nodded slowly. "And financially?" Mira hesitated, then told him the truth. "You would have paid the 420 million in staged releases. And if the forgery surfaced later, even decades later, the penalties built into the contract would bankrupt any attempt to challenge them." The senior advisor went pale. Mira finished softly. "You would have lost everything." The sheikh absorbed this in profound silence. Then he exhaled, a long, controlled breath that sounded like he was reassembling himself from the inside out. Sometimes the moment someone tries to take everything from you becomes the exact moment you discover who was really protecting you all along. The suite settled into a stark, echoing quiet, the kind that follows revelation, not violence. The sellers, now flanked by security, sat rigid and silent. Their attorney's confidence had collapsed into a tight, trembling line across his mouth. The experts avoided eye contact entirely, their reputations evaporating molecule by molecule. But the sheikh looked only at Mira. "You knew the risks when you spoke," he said. Her throat tightened. "I only didn't want you to sign something dangerous." His expression shifted, not softening, but sharpening into something more precise. "Most people," he said, "stay silent when danger isn't theirs." Mira lowered her gaze. She wished she hadn't stepped forward. She wished she had never seen the seal, never recognized the ink, never felt her heart stop when the vellum caught the light. Or maybe she didn't wish that at all. She wasn't sure anymore. The sheikh gestured for his advisors to clear the table. They did so immediately, removing the manuscript box and the contract as though they were specimens contaminated with venom. The room's entire power structure had been inverted. And no one dared pretend otherwise. When the table was clear, the sheikh turned to Mira. "Who taught you to read like this?" he asked. She hesitated, embarrassed by the truth. "No one," she whispered. "I just studied alone. For years." "In school?" "Sometimes." A small, painful exhale. "Then not anymore." The sheikh absorbed that, eyes narrowing with understated gravity. One advisor stepped forward, timidly. "Your Excellency, perhaps she should be dismissed now that the matter is resolved." The sheikh turned his head slowly. "Resolved," he repeated. The advisor swallowed hard. "This is not resolved," the sheikh said. "It is revealed. That is different." He faced Mira again. "Tell me," he said, "when you first saw the manuscript tonight, before you approached me, what did you feel?" She didn't expect the question. Her voice trembled when she answered. "Fear," she said, "because I recognized something I wasn't supposed to see." "And you spoke anyway." She nodded. "Why?" Mira lifted her eyes and for the first time let him see the truth behind them. "Because no one else was going to." A long silence stretched between them. Not heavy, not uncomfortable. Just honest. Finally, the sheikh's voice dropped to something quieter, more deliberate. You exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud. You identified linguistic inconsistencies scholars missed. You deconstructed a contract designed to trap me. You did all of this while clearing plates. She felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not tears, but the pressure of being seen for the first time in years. He continued, People like you shouldn't be invisible. The words hit her harder than she expected. He took one step closer. What do you want, Mira? She froze. No one had asked her that in years. Not professors. Not employers. Not anyone. She tried to speak, but her voice faltered. All she managed was, I don't know. The sheikh nodded once, as if he understood exactly what that meant. Then he turned to his advisors. Prepare the seller's formal dismissal, notify the lab in Geneva that an investigation is coming, and secure copies of everything, the manuscript, the contract, the authentication reports, all of it. His advisors scattered instantly. But Mira stayed still. The sheikh faced her again, expression unreadable. You're not leaving yet, he said. I have something to offer you. The room held its breath. Sometimes the most terrifying door is the one that finally opens in your direction. After the sellers were escorted out and the suite finally emptied, the sheikh remained by the window, city lights flickering across his reflection like scattered fragments of a shattered bargain. He motioned for Mira to step closer. You saw what others did not, he said. And you spoke when you had every reason to stay silent. I need someone like that. She stood frozen, apron creased, hands trembling, heart running ahead of her. I'm establishing a private forensic institute, he continued. Independent, neutral, focused on manuscripts, contracts, and cultural assets. He paused. I want you there, not as staff, as an analyst. Her breath caught. Too fast, too small, too full. I can't, she began, but he lifted a hand. You already did, he said. Tonight. The chandelier light softened around them. The room felt different now. No longer a stage for humiliation, but a threshold. You'll have stability, he added. Resources. A scholarship to finish what you stopped. And a place where your eyes are not a threat. They're an asset. Mira didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded, once. And the sheikh understood. He gave a small, rare smile. Then it settled. She exhaled, the weight of years releasing in one fragile breath. Outside, the city shimmered, unchanged, yet entirely new. Sometimes the smallest voice becomes the one that finally changes its own life.